Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now, today we're going to be talking about music. We're going to be talking about the audio recording industry and its history. Music's kind of an interesting thing because when we think about music, we might be driving in a car or jogging on a beach or taking our dog for a walk or studying or eating. We listen to music constantly. And if we really think about it across books, television, film, and all other kinds of media, we probably consume music the most. One book might take you a few weeks to consume, but a song probably takes you maybe a few minutes. At that rate, if you compound it over time, we've listened to upwards of thousands, even tens of thousands of songs. And so the music industry is really interesting because that industry competes for just a sliver of our time. If we think about a music album, it's typically between 40 to 50 minutes long, maybe an hour long, maybe longer than that. But unless it's a TV show or a movie or a book, we're probably going to be finishing that album fairly quickly because albums tend to be shorter in their duration than TV, film, or video games or any other kind of medium. And so I think when we start thinking about music, it's interesting from a consumer behavior perspective because we consume so much of it. And for marketers, especially in the music industry, it's important to convince people to take a chance on songs. Songs have a lot of low risk to them because really you can sample a song and then you can flip to another one. There's really not a lot of risk for the consumer. Differently, if we buy a book, if we start reading a book and we're halfway through, this was awful, we've wasted maybe 10 hours, maybe 8 hours, and maybe $25. So the music industry is interesting in that regard because people can simply sample things and kind of move along. And so as a result, the impetus is on a lot of artists to make sure that their music is catchy, interesting, and literally hooks people in because people can kind of flip back and forth between each medium, or each song for that matter. So let's get started. So when we think about the music industry, we can also think about music and expression. In the late 1700s in Europe, dancing to music was seen as detestable, especially if people were dancing too close together. And so the waltz was also outlawed as a result. So we have some dancing numbers that are outlawed. Now, when we think about music and when we listen to music, we're always kind of tapping, right? We might be bopping to the beat or moving. Music inherently is linked to physical expression, to bodily expression. And so jazz is also guilty of this in the 1920s into the 1940s. This notion of making people dance was seen as sinful, was seen as kind of a violation of what it is to be human in a lot of different ways, and was seen to kind of lead to lascivious acts, sexual acts. And in order to avoid perversions, a lot of people were against people dancing for that matter. We saw this in jazz from the 1920s into the 1940s, and we also see this in rock and roll in the 1950s. People start kind of gyrating and moving their hips to music. Moreover, we see this in hip hop in the 1990s and 2010s because people are, making motions about killing people or might be grabbing their crotch while they're singing, even though this was something that Michael Jackson did a lot in the 1980s. And so music has also kind of gone alongside with bodily expression. That as music has evolved over time, we have a lot of different bodily expressions that are created from music. And they've become more sexually explicit as time has gone on, but that's also indicative of the cultural forces that are at hand as people create music. We live in a more open society. We live in a society in which we can kind of move and thrust however we want to. There really is no regulation. There really is no restriction. There really is no judgment. And so music has helped push the boundaries of not just bodily expression, but also artistic expression and political expression and any other kind of expression that you can think possible. Rap was criticized in the 1990s for being kind of a music that would incite people, that would anger people, that would motivate people to commit heinous crimes. On the other hand, rap was also a social lens by which we could better understand impoverished ghettos across the United States and understand the upheaval and turmoil that a lot of different rappers faced growing up. And how they feel for their brethren in those neighborhoods as well. So I think for a whole host of reasons, music has resonated with a lot of different people, not just from a bodily expression standpoint, but also from kind of a soulistic standpoint. Let's move along. The invention of recording sound. So in 1850, there was a French printer named Edward Léon Scott de Martinville. Now, he figured out how to record sound. This was a big deal back then. If you were going to listen to music before then, you had to go to a concert hall or an orchestral session or some sort of concert. This was different. So he knew that he could record sound. He couldn't figure out how to play it. 1877, Thomas Edison comes along, our favorite inventor out of New Jersey. He comes along and he successfully creates the phonograph. Now, the phonograph allows for playing sound that has been recorded. And so this comes out of the Greek words for sound and writing. Phono, sound, writing, graph. And so combined together, it's sound and writing. And it's writing because literally sound was written onto a recording disc. And so it was captured and ensconced on the disc itself. This is patented in 1878 as a type of answering machine. So that's kind of how this starts first. The idea is that people can use this as a way to listen to phone calls that were missed or that messages that might be needed to be relayed to people. In the 1900s, record-playing phonographs were used. So we have the Victor Talking Machine Company. This company is the first company to come out that really does a solid job in monetizing mechanical answering machines and recording devices. But we still have an issue here because even though we can listen to music, sound quality was not that good. This changed when shellac was needed in World War II. So because shellac was needed in World War II, which is kind of a finisher for paint, the record industry began using vinyl records. This is a different kind of material. This material allowed for way better durability with music and way better recording sound. So artists were really able to capture what they were singing, saying, recording, and answering machine voices were also recorded well as well. Let's move along. So, record improvements post-World War II. In 1948, CBS Records introduces the long-playing record. So this is about 20 minutes of music that are offered here on each side. Now multi-song albums can be sold. They also create the 45, which was developed by RCA and was used for singles. So now we're not only teaching people, hey, you can listen to music, but hey, you can also get a better sense of the kind of music that's being recorded because you can hear it better, and we're teaching you to listen to it in 20-minute increments. That's a major deal. That's something that really wasn't done before. Remember, we're lucky enough if we can record just one thing. If we can record just one thing, that's a big deal. But now here we are teaching people to listen to 20-minute increments. Oh, this album, this long playing disc is 20 minutes. If that's the industry standard, I need to fill up the album or the record with 20 minutes. If I don't do that, I'm going to have an issue. Or I'm not fulfilling the amount of time that I can record onto the disc itself. So a business is starting to kind of brew here, in which artists are starting to get the sense that they need to be able to record at least 20 minutes. If we look back on the slide, you can also see here the audio tape was developed in 1929, but became popular during the 1940s. So this gave consumers control in recording sounds themselves. It was also lightweight and allowed for editing as well. So this is also critical here, because if consumers can record the sounds, and if they're able to do it themselves and create audio tapes, then me as an artist, I can go ahead and I can record myself. I can make podcasts even before podcasts were created. I can try to mimic what I hear on the radio and maybe submit a demo tape. Maybe submit something that is going to help me rise as a celebrity, or at least give somebody an opportunity to know what I can offer them at the local radio station. And so we quickly see here that with the price of these pieces of technology dwindling and the ease by which we can use them, people start adopting audio tape recorders. And this is something that, children up through adults can use here. And slowly but surely, a music industry is developed here. Let's move along. Now, the radio business and its royalties. In the 1920s, sales of records skyrocketed as 30 million records were sold in 1915 alone. They actually tripled each subsequent year through the 20s. And so in the 1920s, we start realizing that there are certain artists that are around. And so we learn about Bing Crosby. We learn about other popular artists. And a pop culture is formed here. Just before this, in 1914, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, otherwise known as ASCAP, was formulated to collect copyright fees for music publishers and writers. And they charged that, radio was contributing to the plummeting sales of records. And so there was some concern about that. And so ASCAP came together to say radio studios that play music from Bing Crosby, that play music from artists and bands and other musicians should be compensated. Every time a Frank Sinatra song may be played or a Glenn Miller band song may be played, it was important that those artists were compensated from the record company. And so commercials begin to air on the radio as a way, one, to raise revenue for the radio station itself, but also as a way to start paying royalties to artists and to record companies. Let's move along. The tape cassette. The tape cassette was invented in the 1960s and was first developed by Philips. It allowed consumers to listen to music and even take it with them on the go. Again, this is a new media behavior that really hadn't been seen before. This notion that artists could record music and give it to people, and people could decide when they want to listen to it. People could decide when they want to play it. People could decide when they want to partake in the music itself. That's a major, major evolution in what was going on in media distribution at that time. So this grows in popularity in the 60s and 70s. It's more useful than a record player. Frankly, you can pick a song on the audio tape. You can fast forward, you can rewind, you can stop, you can play, you can pause. You're giving people more control, which is useful here. It spurs the sale of boom boxes as well. That is what that goofy, antiquated silver box looks like. It's actually a boom box. And so people were able not only to play music where they wanted to, but to literally carry the equipment themselves that was needed for this. I can remember when I was younger, seeing boom boxes in parks, seeing them on basketball courts, seeing them all over the place. And boom boxes still do exist. They are different, but you can still find boom boxes or the equivalent home speaker in which you can play your iPod and it can kind of boom out across a playground or a basketball court for that matter. And so, again, you're enabling audiences to really manipulate the environments that they're in. If I'm playing basketball in the city, I can quickly make it kind of a smooth jazz affair if I'm playing music while I'm playing basketball. I can play rap, I can play rock and roll. So now people are getting the sense that they can kind of enliven the environment around them. They can change the mood, the atmosphere by playing music. And so this is a ridiculously incredible innovation. And it really does make music listening ubiquitous. I can take music along with me. I can listen to it when I'm eating. I can listen to it when I'm relaxing. I can listen to it when I'm outside. I don't need to be near an electrical socket. So if you think about it, where people listen to music is critical when you're creating music. If you think about it, early music was orchestral and jazzy and slow, fun. But then we are able to transport it to parks where we can be loud. We can be a little bit more energetic and interesting and fun and scream. And so when you have those opportunities, music itself also changes as well. If you're at the beach, or if you're swimming, or if you're playing basketball, or if you're studying, you're going to want different kinds of music genres to be available to you. And so we can see here with that the ability to be able to do that, that to have the sentiment of I can listen to music anywhere. I want rock and roll, or I want R&B, or I want it elsewhere, right? So I do think something that we kind of take for granted is I do think the portability of music has also influenced the kind of genres that we actually wind up liking. I don't think rap would have been as popular were it not portable and were it not able to be played in a whole host of different environments. I can't imagine blasting rap while I'm eating a dinner, but I can imagine blasting rap when I'm at the gym or if I'm driving. And so certain genres also work with kind of what we do. So music has kind of evolved as well from an entertainment type of consumption activity all the way through a mood manipulator, really. Because if I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling happy, if I'm in a park, if I'm elsewhere, there is music now basically for any kind of mood and any place that I want to be. And it wasn't always like that. So the portability of music, I would argue, has been crucial in the development of so many genres that really do capture things that we do every day and kind of how we feel. Let's move along. 1980s and 2000s. CDs, then bust. So in the late 70s, Sony and Philips were working on a way to digitally design record discs. CDs come out and dominate the 1980s. They're very, very dominant. In 1985, 1988, really everyone was listening to the CD. Everybody had used the Sony Walkman in the 1970s, so everybody was used to having the tape recorder buckled to their belt. But that evolution from tape to CD was pretty easy in that regard because people were already used to carrying around a portable device. With the CD, you could seamlessly and literally pick each song that you wanted to listen to. Yes, you could fast forward with the tape recorder and you could rewind, but it wasn't always precise. With the CD, it's digital, it's precise. You want to listen to song 3 on Thriller, which I think is a pretty young thing, if I recall correctly. All you have to do is hit, 1, 2, 3, and then you're at that song. So again, teaching consumers that they can skip around, that they have control over how they want to listen to the CD. If you want to listen to the last song on the album through the first, you can do that. And so it's kind of an interesting way because artists typically pick the list of the songs themselves for the album because they're very much interested in figuring out how they want their consumers to feel during the album. But with this new kind of manipulation, you're able to see, the first 3 songs on Bon Jovi's album are sad. I kind of want to start with number 4 and 5, and then we'll circle back to the first song on the album. That's the new kind of behavior for consumers. And so artists might put out a playlist of, how to listen to the album, but people are now kind of going back and forth as a result. Also, with the CD, it is a little bit easier to carry. CD holders, CD albums kind of come out as a way for you to literally carry all of your CDs. And so with the evolution of the CD, people can carry CDs with them. They can start creating playlists in a sense. They were able to do it with tape recorders as well, but with CDs, you're able to carry more music on a CD than you are on a tape recorder. And you're really able to change up the mood really, really quickly because you have what eventually came out as CD players, really, really big CD players that would hold 6, 7, 8 CDs at a time, and so you could literally rotate. And so if you have a CD player that holds 5, 6, 7 CDs, then you're really able to kind of pick the moods, pick the songs, pick anything that you want, and leave the machine on for a few hours. And so I can remember going to parties not too long ago in which it was just a CD player that was playing. And people put in the CDs that they wanted to, and you let it play. And it would play the first CD, then the second CD, then the third CD, and on and on and on. Let's go back to that slide. So with digital recordings, they are compressed now, which is very, very exciting. And they become way more manageable as a result. In 1999, Napster comes out and file sharing service is made available. Songs could be downloaded illegally for free. This is a major, major issue for the music industry. And a lot of artists went on MTV, like Lars Ulrich from Metallica, complaining about what was going on here. They were losing revenue. You know, even though a lot of these artists were millionaires and certainly didn't need the money by any stretch, it does make sense that they were entitled to receiving money still from the songs that made them wealthy. You know, it doesn't stop just because somebody's wealthy. Somebody is owed every cent from their intellectual property. And so this was a very sound argument, even though a little pathetic. Napster was eventually shut down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2001 for what it was doing. It's now since been relaunched as a music streaming service, though not as popular as it was. It is legit. Let's move to the next slide. So there were many, many music lawsuits in the 2000s. 2005, P2P, or player-to-player service, Grokster, was shut down and was fined $50 million by the U.S. federal courts. It allowed record companies to pursue legal action against any P2P service. So any service that was allowing people to people, player to player, to download music and to share, this was kind of the precedent that was set by the courts. And so by 2005 or 2010, eDonkey, Morpheus, and LimeWire were shut down. Kazaa was able to settle a lawsuit and also became legal. Major internet service providers have all kind of come together as a way to mitigate this for the future. And they've largely done a really good job, including AT&T, Cablevision, Comcast, Time Warner, Verizon. They've agreed to identify consumers who are illegally downloading music by sending them copyright alerts. Let's move to the next slide. Really what saved the digital music industry and really convinced people to come back and to purchase music was iTunes. iTunes and other music streaming services like Spotify and Pandora. But iTunes kind of starts this march toward, okay, we understand that consumers want to purchase singular songs. They want more control. They don't want to pay as much. They're looking for other ways to carry music. And we should probably try to meet them halfway. Steve Jobs sees this coming down the pike in the early 2000s. He even talks about it in the late 90s, that there will be a massive disruption to the music industry. And so in 2003, iTunes was launched to support the iPod. In 2008, iTunes became the top music seller in the United States, even beating out Walmart for that matter. And by 2012, it has sold more than 16 billion songs. Cloud-based music has been introduced in the past few years, which has nullified the need to own music at all. Some of these programs include Spotify and Pandora and others. Let's go to the next slide. So these were some of the streaming services that I was talking about: SoundCloud, Apple, Pandora, Napster, Tidal, iHeartRadio, Spotify. These streaming music services are very, very valuable because they allow people to pick playlists. They allow people to really fork over data. And so these music streaming services have a lot of data on people. They know when people like to listen to rock and roll. They know when people like to listen to R&B. They know when people like to listen to certain kinds of music. And so these subscription services are very, very valuable because data is being collected. If we go back and really think about everything we've gone over in this lecture, we never really knew how people used music. We can think about the record player. We can think about the tape cassette. We can think about CD players. But if I sell a CD to Rebecca, or if I sell an album to Olu, or if I sell a record to somebody, they just bought it. I have no idea how many times they listened to a song. I have no idea when they listened to the song. I have no idea if they would like other kinds of music. I have no data on that. But with streaming services, we have data. Data is always collected and made because every time you listen to something on Spotify or Pandora, it's recorded. It's logged in, if you will. And so with these big databases, marketers are able to better target audiences for music. They're able to understand trends. They're able to understand when Lifehouse or Bon Jovi or Poison or Tekashi 6ix9ine or Jay-Z or Kanye West or Rihanna or Metallica or Slayer or Korn or Limp Bizkit, when any of these artists come to town, they can see how that might impact Spotify or Pandora listeners in the area. So it might be an opportunity to make more money. It might be an opportunity to push the band's songs. It might be an opportunity to launch an album on Pandora before a concert. So many different things are at their fingertips through the use of streaming services. So it's not just convenience for the audience, they're also gaining information. That's what makes the entertainment industry so fascinating to study right now. The movie industry is starting to track consumption behavior. So is television, so is radio. And so, we used to use surveys and focus groups, essentially, to better figure out how people are using these products. But with data, we can quickly move and start using actual data to better understand how people use these tools. Let's go back to that slide. So Spotify is a European service, one of these music services. It is located in Europe. I believe it's in Sweden. It launched in 2011. Users can subscribe for $5 to $10 a month. $5 to $10 a month is not much at all when you consider how expensive albums are, how expensive radio or tape cassettes are, for that matter. And so when we think of streaming music services, there's a lot to be said for the way in which we're starting to listen to music now. With terrestrial radio, with satellite radio, and with streaming music services, there's a lot of music that's available to consumers, and much of it is cheap. When we think about the distribution of music and kind of where it's been and where it's going, I think the most important thing to think about is that as we collect more and more data on our audience members, it becomes even more crucial for artists to really think about whether or not they're putting out music that people will like. Now, for some artists that are listening to this, you might think that that's crazy. And that's where the issue comes into play. Data is very useful in finance. Data is very useful in healthcare. Data is useful in economics. But when you give data to artists, it becomes a completely different question. An artist like Jay-Z or an artist like Limp Bizkit or an artist like Korn or an artist like Matchbox 20 or Counting Crows or MGMT or The Killers might say to a record label, well, this data is interesting and it's fascinating and it's good to know about our audience, but we're not really interested in implementing it. This is the issue with what art really should be. Art is an expression. It's a humanistic expression. It's an expression that is recorded on every album, on every record, on every tape disc. And there's supposed to be errors, and there's supposed to be art on those recordings. In fact, art is not supposed to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And so when we think about what art really is, how music might be informed in the future, it's a very interesting proposition. Could music be informed by data? Could it be that in the future some artists are going to be using words that are most popular with people, or be using lyrics that are most popular with people? The last few years have been criticized for having repetitive music. Lyrics and choruses that really aren't that creative and really don't grasp a piece of the human experience. Loss, love, being on your own. Instead, we have a lot of music now that has been deemed repetitive. We'll see what the future holds for the music industry. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.